So what does the word culture mean for me? I would say that culture is something that can be very broad. It can be something that is tangible, like a film or a painting. But it can also be something that's intangible, like an attitude or an outlook or a way of viewing the world. And so I would say that in terms of both of those aspects, tangible and intangible, I think that Canada's got a lot going for it in terms of its culture. My name is Meghan Bissonnette. I'm from the country of Canada, originally from the province of Alberta, which is where I was born. Canada is a wonderful country. I am very proud to be Canadian. And one of the things I would like to say, of course, is that many people think that Canada is just sort of the United States, except maybe a little bit more far north. And that is true to some extent. There is this kind of general North American culture in both the US and in Canada. There are a number of distinctions, and I think one thing that is unique about Canada that I would like to share is that it has a really vibrant cultural scene. So Canada does do a lot to fund and support the arts, not just visual arts, but also music, radio, film, television. Recently, with our new government that came into power a couple years ago, there was a huge raise in arts and culture funding, about almost $2 billion. And some of the things I really love about Canadian culture is that there is this strong support from the government, but also an encouragement to be innovative and to be creative. So for example, Canada has this network of what are called artist-run centers, and they're essentially galleries that are nonprofit, that are funded by grants, and are devoted to showing non-commercial art, so art that wouldn't be successful in, say, a commercial gallery. And so those artist-run centers are all across the country, and that is a really wonderful way for young artists to, well, I wouldn't say just young artists, but young artists, mid-career artists, more experienced artists, to be able to show their works. Yes, well, as I mentioned, you've got this more general North American culture. So we do have a lot of holidays and traditions that are similar to the United States. Christmas is on December 25th. I had to think about that for a second. We celebrate Easter, we celebrate Halloween, we celebrate Thanksgiving. So we celebrate Thanksgiving in October rather than in November. What I will say is a little bit different, and one of the things I experienced when I was growing up is that the customs are a little bit different. For example, our Thanksgiving is, like American Thanksgiving, very much about giving thanks for the harvest. So of course there's turkey, there's mashed potatoes, there's cranberries, there's all of those foods that Americans would be familiar with. But I think what is maybe different is that, it's not really an opportunity to watch football. Football watching isn't really a big thing in Canada. There's not that kind of commercial element to a lot of the holidays. So after Thanksgiving, you would then, say, go shopping for Black Friday. And that's generally not a custom in Canada. So some of the ones that are different, I guess one of the more popular Canada holidays is called the 2-4 weekend, and that's actually the Victoria Day, May 24th long weekend. So Canadians call it the 2-4 weekend, although 2-4 is also slang for 24 case of beer. So Canadians love to enjoy a 2-4 on the 2-4 weekend. So actually brought some examples. I'm going to go into my pocket, and our money is very similar to the United States. We've got, I just brought big bills. So we did have pennies. Pennies got phased out a few years ago. So no more pennies, although they're still calculated. So if you go to a store and your purchase is, say, $25.81, then I think they would charge you like $25.80. So, and then of course after that, after pennies, you've got nickels, then you've got dimes, then you've got quarters. Then what happens is we have a $1 coin that is called a loonie because it has the Canada loon on it. And I didn't bring an example of that, but then a few years after the loonie was introduced, they introduced the $2 coin. So you can see it's kind of a two-tone. The loonie is like this gold brassy color. And this is actually, so this is a $2 coin and this is a toonie. Why it's called a toonie? Because it rhymes with loony. Like there's no other reason behind. It has a bear on it. So, so you got your loonie, your toonie, and then so this is the $5 bill. And a few years ago, or a number of years ago, this is the $10 bill. So we've got a number of dead prime ministers and famous people and some wonderful landscape scenes on the back. And our $20 bill has the Queen because we are a Commonwealth country, although of course she's mainly a figurehead person. And then on the back is one of the Canadian war memorials and the poppies. So on Remembrance Day, which is November 11th, so that coincides with, I think, Veterans Day, we wear a poppy on our jacket or our lapel or something, and that's just to support those who have fought for our country. So yeah, and a few years ago, they replaced, we had paper bills, very much like the United States, but now we have these fancy plastic bills with lots of shiny things on them. The other wonderful thing I love about our money is that there's Braille on it. So those who can't see can know what they're actually handling. So yeah, which makes sense. Yes, but maybe not stuff that I'm as familiar with. I mean, there is a lot of Canadian folk tradition in music and dancing. For example, when I was living on the East Coast, there is a lot of interest in traditional fiddling and stuff like that. That is something that I know less about. In terms of music, we have a really strong kind of indie music scene. And that comes again from, a lot of support for culture and for music and emerging musicians and things like that. So when I lived in Halifax, for example, like everyone was in a band. Indie music was just so popular. And we even had a festival called the Halifax Pop Explosion, just completely devoted to indie music. So my knowledge about Canadian music tends to be more contemporary. One of the great things to see, I think, especially like in the last couple of decades, is seeing Canadian musicians become more popular, like on not just a national but international stage. And there are older examples like Leonard Cohen and Neil Young and stuff like that. But for example, I very vividly remember hearing about the Grammys a few years ago, and this was the year that Arcade Fire took like Best Album, and everyone was like, Arcade Fire who? But me, I was just like, ooh, go Canada, because they're another great example of a Canadian band that's had success outside of Canada. We also tend to laugh at or make fun of, I guess, Justin Bieber, Nickelback, like, oh, sorry everyone that we that we gave you Justin Bieber, but yes. Okay, so one thing that I think might surprise people is that we don't elect our prime minister. So because of our political system, we elect our members of parliament, but we don't directly elect a prime minister. So there are several major parties. There is the Conservative Party. There is the Liberal Party. So the conservatives are conservative, the liberals are liberal. And then we have our slightly more liberal New Democratic Party, the NDP. There's also the Green Party and the Bloc Québécois. So we've got 5 major parties. Each party elects a leader. And during our election, which are generally held about every 4 years, we elect our member of parliament, and it's based on the district that you're in. And however many members of parliament are elected from that party, the party with the most MPs or the most members of parliament, their leader becomes the prime minister. So for example, our current prime minister is Justin Trudeau, and he is the leader of the Liberal Party. And because the Liberals won a majority of seats in the last election, then Trudeau became prime minister. It's an interesting system because Justin Trudeau also had to get elected as a member of parliament for his district. So there are some cases, and they're quite rare, where the leader of a party doesn't actually win their seat. And don't ask me what happens if they're, if that's the party that has the majority. That I don't think that's ever happened, but it is a possibility where you could have this weird system or this weird thing where the leader of the party just doesn't get elected to parliament. Okay, so Justin Trudeau actually is the son of a former prime minister. So that helps as well when your father was one of the most popular prime ministers in my lifetime. So, yeah. One thing I would encourage people to do if they ever travel to Canada, and if they have some time, is to do a road trip. The Trans-Canada Highway is the main highway that runs through Canada. I had a number of times growing up, because we didn't have a lot of money, we would move by driving across the country. So instead of buying a plane ticket or a train ticket, we just had to pack up our car. But the Trans-Canada Highway starts just like it says, it starts all the way on the west coast, goes all the way to the east coast, and it is just a gorgeous road trip. So that I have really fond memories of driving through Canada on the Trans-Canada Highway. All right, girls, we're moving across the country. So, in terms of food, one of my favorite foods, or I think one of the more unique foods, a lot of people know about poutine. That, of course, is a distinctive food that's starting to become more popular in the United States. But I would encourage people to try the, not poutine, but the donair. So if you go to the East Coast, although there is donairs in other places, try a donair. It's an invention that came out of Halifax. They make this donair sauce. It's kind of sweet, so you've got this kind of savory sweet thing going on. You put it in a pita. It's sort of Mediterranean, but very distinctly Canadian. So yeah, donairs. And another thing that I really love are butter tarts. They could possibly cause a heart attack, but they are just delicious. So, and it's Somewhat like a pecan tart, but without the pecans and with raisins. So, yeah. How has the library supported my culture? I feel as an immigrant to be in a somewhat privileged position compared to maybe other immigrants because I'm generally not recognized as being an immigrant. And I would say that, I've found a lot of resources at the library for Canada. For example, the book that we have here, the Mike Myers Canada book, is totally awesome. I would recommend checking that out. There are plenty of great books on the Mesa County website about Canada. In terms of celebrating Canadian culture, it was not something that I really expected. I don't know. Us Canadians, maybe, I guess I don't want to stereotype, but I feel that Canadians generally tend to be a little bit more modest, So a lot of Americans maybe say that they don't know much about Canada, and I don't really have a problem with that, It's nice and quiet out there. Leave us alone. I'm sorry. Every time there's an election in the United States, at least for the last couple of years, like when the election results start to roll in, the Google searches for how to immigrate to Canada tend to go up. So you might actually want to have more books about Canada. It seems like there's, some curiosity there. I have always loved wherever I've lived in Canada, whether it's small cities in southern Alberta, whether it's Halifax, whether it's Toronto. I've always felt like we've had great public libraries. I will say, though, that the libraries in Toronto are probably one of the most interesting because Toronto actually has the largest library branch system maybe in North America. So the Toronto Public Library is about 100 different branches. And so I never went to the main Toronto Public Library when I was there because I always had my nice little neighborhood library, the St. Clair branch in Toronto, that was housed, I believe, in an old Carnegie building. Don't quote me on that, but just a wonderful small neighborhood library where it kind of just felt like home. Yes, so how does my culture help to define my identity? And thinking along the lines of Canadian culture, that is, again, one of the things where I didn't really understand a lot about being Canadian until I was able to move to the States and then go back to Canada as an adult and to kind of experience living in another country and then understanding more about what made my country unique. I think one of the things that's kind of challenging about Canada is that we do get a lot of American media and American culture and American customs. And sometimes it feels like it's sort of just a northern version of America. But when I think about Canadian culture, I do very much see that difference there. And I'll give you maybe a more explicit example. So several months ago when the coronavirus pandemic was just starting and we went into lockdown. And also Canada went into lockdown as well. So back in March and April during the pandemic when a lot of people were in lockdown under stay-at-home orders, instantly in the United States you started to see polarization and politicization. Whereas in Canada, there was a lot more buy-in for things like social distancing and mask wearing and, staying at home. and things like that. And I think part of the reason was because of that idea of culture. So in Canada, there is a lot more of a mentality of cooperation, and not just not just an independent mentality, but doing things for the greater public good. So that's why we have things like universal health care and the child care benefit, and other programs like old age assistance and things like that, because there is this understanding that, we're not all just in it for ourselves. We've got to help each other out. And that, I think, became very striking when all of a sudden we were told to just stay at home for the greater public good. I guess one thing I'll say is that, okay, so right now, technically, the border is closed. You can't go to Canada, but I would encourage people to go visit when the border is reopened. It's a wonderful place to visit. So there's lots of different places to go. The landscape, you have everything from your prairies to your mountains to your Atlantic region to your forests to your snow. But yeah, I haven't experienced it all, so there's a lot of more places I want to go to. So I would just encourage people to go visit.